This is Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast, episode number 190. Today's special guest was Dr. Katie Boston-Leary, and she talks with us about the importance of nurse well-being from the bedside to the C-suite. You won't want to miss this one, folks. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. This is the only podcast that shows you how to leverage polarity intelligence, an essential competency for healthcare leaders, and the missing logic in healthcare, so you can create healthy, healing organizations and become a thriving, resilient, and unstoppable healthcare leader.
We are your hosts, Tracy Christofferson and Michelle Trosett. We've been best friends and colleagues for over 30 years. And during that time, we coached healthcare leaders across North America around how to create healthy, healing organizations.
Today, we coach healthcare leaders and leadership teams to live thriving, resilient, and balanced lives, combat burnout, and create the best places to give and receive care.
This podcast is for the unsung hero of healthcare, the healthcare leader. We want you to know we see you and we'll be here for you each week. In this podcast, we're going to challenge healthcare's industry norms, flip limiting beliefs, and share proven strategies so you can be your best self at work and at home, live and lead intentionally, and experience well-being and joy.
We are glad you are here and look forward to sharing the journey with you. If you aren't totally convinced this podcast is for you, just listen to a few episodes and convince yourself.
Well, hello, everybody. It's another episode of Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Tracy.
And I am the other, Michelle.
So quiet and gentle, that voice is.
It's a quiet day. I'm using my indoor voice today, Tracy.
Evidently. She must be just zoning out here, just chilling, zenning.
I'm pretty chill after that last interview.
Yeah, it was great. It was a really great interview with Katie. And wow, could have just sat here and talked for a couple more hours.
I think so.
Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah, she's just a lovely person, a lot of energy, a lot of great information. And
just really what struck me about her is she's living her purpose and living on purpose. I mean, she's really bringing what she's learned into her significant role at the American Nurses Association.
Yeah. And she's really been studying what's happening out there and shared some great data insights with us, and it aligns with everything we're seeing.
I know.
And we're talking to leaders every day. So,
yep, great alignment and great chemistry with us and Dr. Katie Boston-Leary. So let us tell you a little bit about her. Yep. She is the Director of Nursing Programs at the American Nurses Association, overseeing the Nursing Practice and Work Environment Division and Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. She's also the co-lead for Project First Line, a multi-million-dollar grant collaborative with the CDC for training on infection prevention and control. Katie is also the co-chair of the DEI Committee for the Healthcare Leaders Network Delaware Valley, an ACHE affiliate. She helped redesign the Nurse Leadership Institute at the University of Maryland with an embedded coaching program. Katie is an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland School of Nursing and the School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve University. She is a board member on St. John's University Health Programs and an editorial advisor board member with WebMD Medscape. She was identified in August 2019 Health Leaders Journal as one of the 5 chief nursing officers changing healthcare. Her most recent research was qualitative study on nurses' perception of power dynamics in the hospital setting. She is a well-known speaker nationally and internationally with many publications and podcast guest invitations. And we are so grateful she accepted our invitation to be a guest on Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. So here is our interview with Katie. Well, welcome, Dr. Katie Boston-Leary, to Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and really thankful for you having me on your amazing program.
Thanks. We're super excited for today.
We are looking forward to this conversation. Yeah. So our first question for you is that we know burnout is top of mind for all health professions, and that it's just been running rapid throughout the healthcare community. And we also know that COVID-19 really exacerbated stress for healthcare executives and the workforce. So we'd like you to start out by telling us about the American Nurses Association, or ANA's Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation program and efforts that your program is doing to help nurses combat burnout.
Sure. I think that's a great opener, because one of the things that we continue to stress, and I probably should use a different word, emphasize to people on the outside, is that this issue, right, of burnout, stress injury has always been there, right? It's not something new or a newly discovered phenomenon as it relates to nurses. Is it more pronounced now since the start of the pandemic? Absolutely. Has it waned since we're at the somewhere between the downslope of the peak, where we should start doing some rebuilding? Yes, it is. But Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation was formed 5 years ago, and we're actually celebrating our anniversary, our 5th anniversary, because we recognized through data that the nursing profession is one of the unhealthiest professions in the U.S. We had enough data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics around where nurses stand compared to other professions in terms of nutrition, sleep, exercise, and healthy eating, and really about how even the occupational hazards that surrounds a profession that impacts nurses' overall well-being. We felt that we should do something. So the Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation program has been in place, as I said earlier, for about 5 years. And the focus has really been on bringing to light the fact that it's important to focus on nurses' well-being, and comprehensively, by the way, not just one aspect over another. We offer these programs and services and resources for free. We felt that that was important because this is mission-based, and we have been in this space for a while, and we've been collecting data ourselves over the last 5 years that indicates that we need to sit up and take notice and do something about nurses' overall health and well-being.
Mm. Have you seen any improvement since you started the programs, Katie?
Well, it's hard to say. So I'll start with this. We did finally do a longitudinal study on this, and it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's improvement. What we are seeing is that certain groups of nurses in certain settings struggle more than others. It depends on whether you're in an acute care setting, your age, and there's so many variables. The other thing that makes it hard to determine whether there's been an improvement is because a true longitudinal study would mean that the same group of nurses that took the initial study would be the same group of nurses that will study over the years. And we have not found that with our research because we know that nurses tend to engage in more other care than self-care. So in a lot of cases, when we do these studies, and we've assessed the data we've received from our heat map surveys, which is an assessment that every nurse does when they enter into being a participant in Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation, they don't come back and do a repeat study to indicate, whether they have improved or not. So collectively and cumulatively, it's hard for us to say, but we do know that we're even more concerned now than we were back then when we started looking at this data.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that says a lot, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Well, and we knew, when COVID hit, there was so much support for the front line and nurses, which they needed desperately. And we were so thrilled to see so much support going out to them. But we kind of had an inkling that it wasn't going to be long before the leaders were going to be experiencing the same thing. They were under a tremendous amount of stress and strain, and have been, right, for years as well. And so, and we know they're the linchpin in the organization. If they're not strong, it's difficult for the clinicians to be strong and for the organization to be strong. And so we kind of turned our attention towards them. And we noted that you also studied the chief nurse executives and their experiences during COVID. And your study was the lived experiences of chief nursing executives during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you share with us a little bit about your findings and the top 3 challenges that they faced leading through the pandemic?
Yeah. And first of all, I'd like to shout out to Health Leaders Media for helping sponsor our study. And also to a dear, sweet colleague of mine who's since retired, Dr. Linda Hoffler. But when a nurse retires, they don't really retire, so she's still busy. We all 3 entities and people put our heads together because we felt that we need to do something in this space. And we uncovered some very interesting facts. And this was a mixed methods approach, if you will, when we actually had a quantitative survey go out. And we also did some one-on-one interviews of nurses to find out how they were feeling. And the top 3 challenges that were identified during the pandemic was staffing was number 1, of course, and nothing came close to that by a mile. Second was burnout. Third was turnover. And I'll add in the 4th, which is capacity. Workload made the top 5, right? And part of that has to do with the fact that the span of control for nurse leaders are insane.
Yeah.
And it's understandable to a certain degree because we are the largest workforce in any institution, particularly in hospitals where most of our CNOs are. They have the largest workforce, i.e. the largest expense. And the FTE count doesn't do it, right? Because you have your per diems and your part-times and all of those pieces that need to be considered. And below the CNO, there's not much of layering of support, if you will, to reduce a lot of what's required in terms of your span of control. And it gets worse when you get down to the manager level. So not surprising there, but staffing was number 1. And we're seeing that play out also with our staff nurse feedback in terms of intent to leave the profession. If you were to leave, why would you? And the feedback that we got in that survey, which is conducted by the American Nurses Foundation, is staffing, and second is well-being. So for the first time, I think ever, you have chief nurses and staff nurses saying the top 2 issues of staffing and burnout and well-being being their key issues that needs to be addressed, which will impact their willingness to stay in their roles. And there's a lot to pay attention to there because the staffing issues, again, are more pronounced. And we're seeing data that suggests that we have a drop in the nursing workforce for the first time, a 4% drop in the last 40 years. And that drop is with a certain group of nurses, not nurses that are close to retirement. It's actually the future. Our nurses between 25 to 34 years old that are opting out. So we have to really look at how we can better support our chief nurses so they can better support their leaders, so they can better support their teams. I.e. nurses that are taking care of patients. I'm really big on Simon Sinek's thinking here, where he says that a healthcare leader's role is to take care of the people that take care of patients. And we have to make sure that systems are set up for chief nurses to do exactly that. And there's a lot more work to be done because what we also found when we did these interviews, there's, of course, this cloak of bravery that you have to wear as a chief nurse, that everything's going to be all right and you have things under control. Yeah. And for most of the folks that we talked to, there was a lot of fear and concern and a relief to be able to share openly about the fact that they don't always feel that way. And the other startling finding from our interviews and the survey that we released was that most CNOs sought support outside of their institutions. Most of them reported to their chief executive officer, of course, but the support that they needed that was most meaningful didn't come from within. It came from outside, which is also pretty telling, right? Because the pressures that you do have as a chief nursing officer with cost control, managing labor, and things like that, it really causes this dichotomy where I have these obligations, but when I'm really at this point where I'm up against the wall, I don't know that I feel safe seeking the support that I need within my organization, which is really concerning.
Yes. Very concerning.
It really is. CNOs need psychological safety and
Totally. And we definitely saw a lot of moral distress. Chief nursing officers that didn't sleep well. There was one example where a chief nurse said as soon as she got in the door and put her keys down, she got a call and went right back outside. And when we also, which is another interesting thing that we found, when we also try to when we ask them a question about what do you think you need, what would have been beneficial to you to help you through this crisis, almost immediately they'll start talking about what they can be for their teams. They did not take the time to turn it inward and talk about what support they need themselves. It was always about their teams and being there for them and being supportive for them, which again is concerning, right? Because they need to be poured into too, right? They deserve love and support and well-being and care. And some of that was forgotten during that time.
Yeah. That is exactly what we have found coaching healthcare leaders and with the CNOs we've been working with as well, is immediately they go to their team and they really don't start with themselves at all.
Well, and I think it's all the way down the line. It's every leader, every healthcare leader is really, and it's a part of the nature of the role, right? Like we care for people, right? It's what we do. And then they feel such that strong responsibility to the team that they're sacrificing themselves, their personal well-being for the team.
And that's a shift that we need to make psychologically. There's a cost and there's a price to pay.
Yes.
For that piece. And we're seeing that, right? There's a lot of turnover at the CNO level.
Yeah.
More than we've ever seen. And this is a time where we need strong leaders.
Yes.
And the pool of strong, experienced leaders is becoming shallow.
Yep.
And at the same time, for the nurse leaders that are staying in the arena, their teams are asking for something different. They're asking for, and we need to be receptive to that because similar to the point that you were making about how it is that sacrifice, it is the nature of the beast for you to struggle through and suffer through to be successful. We have this newer generation that's saying of nurses that are coming into the profession and saying not so much.
Yeah.
And for years, we focused too much on the millennials in terms of what they want and how unreasonable they were being. And that always made me cringe because there was a lot of truth in what they were saying in terms of how we need to look at things differently that we never really paid attention to.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of an annoyance in some circles about millennials and the shift in the thinking that they were looking for in terms of how we led and how we supported them.
Yeah.
I chose to actually focus on the millennial effect, where there were things that millennials were saying that we should pay attention to and do differently that were starting to resonate with nurses that have been in the profession for quite some time. And they were asking for those things too.
Sure.
So similar to how we've shifted over the years from an industrial model to where we are today in this new knowledge era, we have to think about how this workforce is different.
Yep.
We should not resist it. We should heed. We should partner. we should have these groups at the table to redesign what the nursing workforce should look like and what leadership should look like, particularly in the fourth industrial revolution that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that we feel the same way, Katie, like the opportunity is right in front of us and we can't keep forging forward. It's a time to pause. What is this informing us and how do we need to course correct?
Yeah. And then there are just some leadership norms, not even necessarily unique to healthcare, right? There are those norms that we have got to bust through. We've got to break those barriers down so that these leaders can be successful without burnout being the cost that they pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. And it starts at the top. It starts with CEOs and CFOs really listening and seeing some of the things that we've done over the years for nurses as a nice to have and what's to do with all these luncheons and parties and celebrations that you do and how that was scoffed at over the years by some, not all. And really think differently about how some of those things were warranted and they were needed because things are hard. And then you also find that the simple things are not simple anymore. The roles that used to be there for support, the IV therapy teams, the pharmacy techs that are available at night, the runners that will go to the supply room at night. Some of those roles were cut for the sake of making margins.
Yeah.
Those all take tolls, right? That makes the job even harder. And then you have the way nurses are looked or managed, so that workforce is managed financially. And it's always about, it's less about focusing on how nurses are impacting the bottom line. And it's more about how we can cut and save and really condense services and those are the things that are this is where my grandma say the chickens come into roost now. It's really at that point where those things that were done, we're now paying the consequences. And now that even if we're in the time where they want to be brought back, there's so much competition for some of those support roles in other industries. It's hard to get them back. So when we don't have those roles in place, it makes it harder for nurses. And nursing is a physically and psychologically taxing position or role. And we have responsibility as leaders to relieve some of those burdens as much as we can so nurses can focus appropriately on providing patient care. Because the biggest issue for nurses that we're seeing in our data is that they leave every day feeling that they did not provide the quality care that they would have liked to provide their patients.
Yeah.
And there's a moral injury with that, right?
Yes.
So that's why we have to look at doing things differently.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
That is so true.
It is. And one of the lines that jumped out at us in your leadership study that you were just referring to is the internal tension or pull that nurse executives feel. And that's actually work that Tracy and I are doing with leaders is pay attention to that internal tension and pull because it's actually a polarity. It's a tension that is trying to help you understand something is being neglected. And so we were really struck that they brought that forward. Maybe didn't use the same words, but they really they're trying to support their teams and care for their own well-being. And we just did a presentation to 240 nurse execs last week. And we did what we call a room split. And we asked to go stand on the side of the room with what your preference pull is, caring for others, going back to what we talked about earlier, or caring for self. And there were only like 5 people standing on the caring for self. So it tells you we have a lot of work to do for leaders to understand both are important. And as a leader, what do I need to do to care for myself so I can, going back to your Simon said it, care for the team? So we have a lot of work to do there. And what do you think the awareness, is there awareness that you see that leaders are beginning to realize, hey, my self-care is important? Are you having any of those conversations?
Yeah, well, we have to remove some of the old adage that if you're a true leader, you're there all the time.
Yeah.
You're rounding all the time. You're present all the time. You're visible all the time. That is a very high expectation. And
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any other healthcare leader that has that expectation in any institution than CNOs. And there is no grace if you run into, mind you, you may have 8,000 nurses in your employ, in your scope, and you run into one and you don't know their name, and there's a shaming and lack of grace for that. And I remember I used to have this pressure to meet everyone, which took a lot, right? Because you can't be everywhere every time. It's a workforce that's constantly moving in and out. And so you can't keep up with that. But that was an expectation of me as a chief nursing officer, which is insane. And some of that annoyance in terms of not knowing people, which is understandable, would come actually from your nurses. So how do you manage that? And I do think part of that is recognizing to everyone, setting expectations early about how I'm not going to get it right all the time. I'm not going to know all your names. I'm going to do my best. But the most important thing is that know that I work for you. I support you. I advocate for you. And I have an open door anytime you want to walk through. And if I'm available, I will make myself available. If I'm not available, you need to give me grace for the fact that I have to take care of myself to take care of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, there is also a premise I like to emphasize about how well-being does not start when you leave the building where you're employed. It actually should start where you are employed. I'm all about the Gallup model about well-being being brought in the building. It needs to be integrated in your workspaces. And that goes for the CNO as well. And I remember even when I did not have enough time to take vacation and have days off and everything, there was a joy that I felt knowing that my nurses were taken care of. There was a joy that I felt in seeing them have a good time. We just had a magnet conference. So we had our best attendance ever. We had 11,000-ish nurses that came to Philadelphia, our Magnet Pathway Conference. And I can't tell you that one of our welcome events that we had in the city, and all these nurses are there, and they're having an amazing time. And I just was content just standing there and watching them have fun. That gave me joy, right? That was my gratitude. Because you know that these guys has had it really rough for the last couple of years. And when they leave here, it's still going to be rough when they go back to where they came from. So I was content just standing there and watching them have a good time.
Yeah.
And we have to set up structures where well-being is a part of our fabric. Where there's no shaming in a nurse saying, I'm going to take a minute and take a walk because it's nice outside. Or I'm going to go get an ice cream. Could you cover my patient? It's okay for me to take a break, even though I'm behind. And we need to do what we can to make sure nurses are not behind and they're having to work extra to get all their work done. But those little things that we need to plant in the building and make it okay, because to a certain degree, nurses need permission. Unfortunately, which is so unfortunate, but that's where we are, to make these moments of wellness. But I think if we start internally, build it there, the rest will come. Because 12 hours is a long time to not do much for yourself, right?
Right.
In some cases, not do anything for yourself, but meet your biological needs.
Yeah.
And we have to do more during those 12-hour shifts, 10 hours, whatever, for nurses to really have moments where they can really be reminded to take care of themselves while they're meeting their biological needs. Because then that sets up the fact that when I leave, I'll continue to build on that. Because most nurses, when they leave their place of employment, they still have to engage in other care because they're mothers, their daughters, they're taking care of aging parents. They have spouses that they have to support. They have to pick kids up from daycare. Yeah. It still continues when they leave. So the key thing is that whole thing about work-life balance, which I shed, is more about life, work integration into life and life first, and how you should set up moments in your life to give yourself joy. I think if we think of, and for example, and I remember during, there will be times where I always in my phone would have some of my favorite songs. And after a long day, I would make sure I have one of my favorite songs ready to play. And it could be a gospel song or something from Beyonce that will give me joy. And I will play it loudly. And even if my phone is ringing, unless it's an emergency, I'm going to listen to that song until the end because I feel I would always think that I have to have some sort of a barrier or crossover from the day that I just had at work to this other space where I need to be at my best and be loving towards those that love me. And that's one of the ways I could do that.
It's great. It's a great example of a shutdown routine that we work with leaders on. Yeah, it is. And, I think we have grown up with the belief that work-life balance isn't possible.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that we have recognized that we can have both. We can have a thriving professional life and a thriving home life as well, or personal life. It's just understanding the tension that sits between those two. It's a polarity. It's a dynamic that's always going to be there. And it's really about a dynamic balance more than a 50-50 balance. And you have to honor those two different components of your life and how they work together to help you get that highest quality of life and to really thrive as a human being, as an individual. And so it takes, the individual has to do their work, just like you set up a habit for yourself. Here's what I do. The individuals need to take responsibility for themselves and their personal well-being, and the organization take care of the infrastructures, the system components as well, right? Because to your point, once I leave that environment, I'm going into another environment, and that personal environment I control. I make the decisions. I choose how I'm going to be in that environment as well, and how that environment impacts me. And so it's that both and of individual and organization, and personal life and professional life, and understanding the tension that sits between them, and how that's just a natural tension that's not ever going to go away. We just have to learn to leverage it like you do tension in a bow and arrow, right?
Totally. And there's this constant shifting, right?
Yes.
To self-correct all the time.
Yes.
I did a talk yesterday at a hospital in Maryland. They had their professional development day. And I showed a video of a kid on a skateboard. And for him to be on that skateboard, there's this constant movement of his feet back and forth, right? And to make sure that he stays on. That's what the approach that we need to take to this concept, right? It's this constant shifting that's required. It's not a static approach. It has to be dynamic. You have to adjust accordingly. If you don't do it so well on November 3rd, aim to do better on the 4th. And just continue to shift your feet. And I think once you get in the habit of knowing that you deserve it, right? We deserve to have playtime, to have me time. That's where the shifting happens, because I also share that for you to engage in self-care, you have to have self-love. You have to love yourself first and know that you should do that for yourself. And there's no apologizing or anything that comes with doing that. I used to have this habit of, if I had a day off, I had to pack my day with appointments and things to do to make me feel fulfilled and not waste the day doing nothing. My husband is the one that said, "What are you doing? Like, it's okay to do nothing." And a very wise person told me that we have to learn that it's okay to be bored.
Yes.
It's okay to be bored and be still at times, because that's a gift you can give yourself. Because we are in a human energy crisis where demand is outpacing capacity, right? Constantly. So to meet those needs, you have to figure out how you can refuel. And refueling is for you to take the time for yourself. Now, and I'll say, as much as I say this, do I do it right all the time? Absolutely not. I'm at this point where I haven't been on vacation in a while. I'm trying to plan it. But one thing I can tell you, I make my moments for wellness all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
I always do something for myself every day. Sometimes multiple things for myself every day. And sometimes it only takes maybe 5 minutes.
Yep.
I would drive around with a golf club in my trunk. And anytime and I would plan sometimes to just go to a hitting range because to be out there, and I'm not a great golfer, by the way, by any means, but I just figured that that's a solo sport that I can set up where I can go to Starbucks, get my favorite drink, go to a driving range, or even at a park and hit a ball. And that's a release.
Sure.
So there are a number of things you can do to build it in and hack yourself, because we have to hack ourselves. Otherwise, life would become busy and we won't take care of ourselves.
Yeah. That's so true. I love that.
I do too.
And, I think the other thing is, you've done so much incredible work in really uncovering what's happening in nursing. One of the questions we have for you is, are you doing any collaborations, ANA doing any collaboration with other professions? Because we know these things are not unique to just nurses, that all the health professions are suffering in different ways and struggling, and leaders as well in those professions. Is there any interprofessional collaboration happening currently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I did not say, which I should have said, even though our program is called Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation, it's open to anyone, whether you're in healthcare or not. Even if you're a spouse of someone that you know, or you just happened on our site, you can go on our site and take the heat map survey and see where you fall in terms of your overall wellness, and it's fine. So it's really open to everyone, because we do believe that self-care and well-being is a team sport.
Yeah.
It's not something some of us can just do on our own. Sometimes we need a peer, and we know that the most effective wellness programs come with that peer support, right? So we've set up this program to reach out to include everyone, because we know that nurses are better, right, when everyone else around us is also in a good place. So we offer this program to everyone. It's open to everyone. But in terms of formal collaborations, I know I don't have any right now that in my head, but that we're doing, because we're so entrenched with also with making this right for nurses, right? Because that's a large group. Yeah. We have 4.3 million nurses in this country, and a testament to how it's hard to get people to engage sometimes because they're so busy.
Sure.
We only have 320,000 participants. So, and that's not without a lot of effort and expense and resources being applied to amplifying our work, what we're doing, why we're here, the fact that it's free. You can connect with people in any community on how to be better for yourself. But so we continue to try to focus on breaking the culture. And we do believe our mantra is also about us leading the nation and being role models to the nation to be well. So we really believe that once we take the lead, because nurses are educators too, we'll get everyone else to follow.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, it does. I love that you're advocating to be role models for others, because it's so important. Yeah. And what advice would you give, Katie, to the emerging leaders about being exemplars for well-being, being those role models? Any few words of advice to the emerging leaders?
Yeah, I say own it, make it your mantra. Make sure you include that as one of your values, and walk the talk. Build it in systematically. I actually talk about in some of my presentations on this in terms of how you can set this up for you to have an effective program or system of wellness. You have to make it systemized. You have to make it structured. You have to build in sustainability.
Yeah.
You have to measure success. And it also needs to be sacred. And I threw sacred in there because these are the things that tends to be cut when times get tough.
Yep.
So you have to like throw your body in front of it every single time to say, nope, this cannot be touched. Because when I started here, I said, this is what I believe in. I have the data that proves that my nurses need this, and this is what we're doing.
Oh, I love that.
So I really do think that it takes an emerging leader to own it and declare it and build it in as an expectation. And then everything else will fall into place.
That's great.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
So true.
Wow. What
non-negotiable.
Yes, the
Totally.
non-negotiables.
Well, we won't have a workforce if we don't take a stand, right? Like we're really at risk here. The whole country's at risk because of what's happening. And if we don't take a stand and say, no, this is not negotiable, we won't have a workforce. We won't have healthcare at all.
A lot at stake.
I mean, that's a lot at stake.
That's true. And that's the implication, because as much as we're providers of care, we're consumers of care too.
That's right.
Yes.
So we do have a dual investment in making sure that this is done right.
Yes.
And it really needs to be clear that it's build a culture of, it's okay to not be okay.
Yep.
And look at some of the things that have been sacred cows for us in nursing, where for a nurse to have a day off, there is this, annoyance if the schedule's already posted, if they ask for a day off. And then you go into the wild and find someone to cover you. And life happens, right? The doctor's appointments and what have you. But we've made it so that it's hard to get a day off. We make sure that even when we encourage folks, okay, find someone that will cover you, we also put in all these stipulations, like make sure it's not going to be overtime. Like that type of stuff has to go away. Even I remember being guilty of this too, or I would have educators who would say, oh yeah, the way to get people to read things is to put signs and stuff in the bathroom stalls, and they'll read it when they're using the bathroom. That should not happen.
That is so true.
That has to stop, right?
Oh, yes.
People should be allowed to pee in peace.
That's right. That's
there are
right.
all these things that we've done historically. I also remember when I would have, no one wanted to work nights, and I'll have my typical night shift team. And whenever a night shift person wanted to go on vacation, it was calamity. Like, who's going to cover that? Yeah. Why is this person taking so much vacation? Could you talk to them and tell them that they're not? It's like all those things need to be undone.
Yes.
Totally agree.
Well, and a leader can't do it alone either. So here's the other thing, right? You have to engage the staff in that this is about us, and we own our culture. We own the norms of our organization. And if we decide that we want it to be different, it will be different. But we have to decide. The leader can't do this alone. And they're trying to, right? They're trying to.
Yeah.
And they can't. Yeah. They just can't. It has to be the collective.
It does, yeah.
That's what will shift the culture. You just have to.
Because we are, our data that we've been reviewing from the American Nurses Foundation indicates even, and it wasn't that great to begin with, the data that we have on nurses responding to the question of my employer cares about my well-being. That wasn't that great to begin with, but even as the criticality and the apex of the pandemic started to shift, where we're in more of a chronic state, those numbers are getting worse. So it's not that people are not working on it. Are they doing the right things?
Yeah.
Are they the things that matter and that have meaning? And part of that also is providing space for nurses to be okay with saying that they're not in a good place. Yeah. We had a virtual roundtable where nurses were, which I didn't expect will come up, but nurses were saying that how do we normalize being on medications as a nurse, like on anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications? And there used to be some shaming in that, because if you don't share that information, and if you did, it's a trip to HR, because you need to make sure that they have record that you like, all those intrusive things. And to boot, all the pieces about EAPs and how they're supposed to be the answer. And it's not the magic wand to addressing these issues. Not to mention, it's not a good thing that EAPs are sitting in HR departments. They don't belong there. They should not be in departments where people are hired and fired. It needs to be in wellness programs and employee occupational health programs. That's where it would matter. And then we should make sure that it's understood that it is confidential. There is a way to make sure that there's some understanding of what data is being collected and how it can go back to nursing, so they can see that it's more about how we want more people to engage in these programs versus keeping track of who's saying what in these programs. There's so many things that we need to done that we've not done so well over the years. And I say I'm thankful to this newer breed and generation of nurses that woke us up to what needs to be done, and how we need to do this right moving forward, because it hasn't been done right.
Yeah. They're a gift, really.
Yeah, it is a gift. Wow. That was awesome.
It was. Thank you so much.
Time for the missing questions,
Now
Michelle?
we're going to ask you some missing questions, Katie. Are you holding on to your seat? All right. So I'm going to ask you 2 missing questions, then Tracy's going to wrap up, and then we'll wrap up our interview. So the first one is, what is your favorite thing to do when you do have Katie time, quote unquote?
My favorite thing to do, I love to dance.
I do.
Me
so
too.
do we.
I love to dance. And I would sometimes even retire from the TV room and go to my bedroom. And before I jump in for my evening shower, I'll play a favorite song and I'll just move to it. Like that, that gives me joy. I love that. And also being with nature. I love my morning walks, beautiful day, just being out there, wind. And it's funny, I was talking to someone recently, because I used to live in a city, and now I'm not in the city anymore. And they said, could you stop talking, because I can hear birds in the background. Do you know that every time I call you, I can hear birds? And I was like, I never pay attention to that. Yeah. So there's these sweet sounds of nature that we tend to lock out because we're in our phones listening to music. And a couple of times I've not had my earbuds in, and it's been glorious to do that.
Oh, that's great.
That's lovely.
That's awesome. All right. Next question is, who is someone, living or no longer living, that you would love to have a cup of coffee and a conversation with today, and why?
Ooh. So living, I'll give you both. So living, because of what it feeds in terms of my venturous alter ego side. And I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Beyonce fan. So that's definitely living her. Mm-hmm. Non-living, I think it would be Desmond Tutu, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yes.
I'm starting to pay attention to his writings and readings and quotes. And even this is a larger than life figure that insisted on being buried in a pine box.
Yeah.
And it just showed to me how distilled he was. He never got bigger than himself. And even towards the end, he was very clear about how he wanted that to go and to not make it all about him. Even though I think making that decision to be buried in a pine box kind of drew attention, like, wow, but it just shows the type of person that he was. And I'm starting to do a lot to read more about him and his legacy and his beliefs and how he led, because he was a transformative figure that I don't think he's really talked about enough.
Yeah. That's awesome. Wonderful. All right, here's the last question. So, we teach people about polarity intelligence, about polarity mindset, and the both and that oftentimes the challenges that we face are really interdependent poles, interdependent values or perspectives that need each other, and we talked about a few of those today. But we also know what we know about polarities is we tend to have a preference pole. So while we may value both, as an example, self-care and caring for others, we may value both, but we have a preference. We lean one way a little bit more than the other. It's just nature. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just knowing that, right? That kind of bias, as you might say. So when it comes to leading and following, what would be your preference?
That's a great question. I'll say following. I would. I've done the leading part a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm at this point of humility with following. I'll one of the things that I'll say, and one of the experiences I'll never forget. I was in between employers, and I was at this point of trying to figure out what my next step was. At the same time, I had a fear of being forgotten about. And then I decided that, and maybe it was with my husband's urging to do something, I started volunteering at a soup kitchen, called a soup kitchen, but it's really a dining room for the less fortunate. And you would go online and you sign up for whether you want to do lunch service or evening service. But in my mind, leading, I decided that, okay, when I get there, I'm going to look at things and see how they're running things. And I'm going to show them how they can do it more efficiently, because that's kind of my thing. I'm going to go in and kind of run things and probably do some leadership stuff there while the other opportunity opens up, right? And then I go there and they say, oh, this is your first day. Let me show you around. Okay, here's a bucket, here's a mop, here are 3 bowls, where in one bowl you put soap, the other you put water, and the other you put bleach. And you're going to clean the dining room. And I'm looking at this going, oh my gosh, this is what my life has become. Like because then I said, well, if I'm here, why am I in the kitchen doing cleanup? Like, can I be in the kitchen cooking something, or should I be help with putting the trays together? Like, I'm here doing, housekeeping work, right? But then there was this appreciation that I finally did get by this process, where I felt so good to be small, right? I felt so good with my 3 buckets and my mop and I attacked it with pride and ferociousness, where it became a thing where I'll go in and I'll just go right to the closet. Even if I had an opportunity to work in the kitchen, I'll go, no, I got this. And I go and do my water and everything. And I did that for about 2 months. And while I was doing that, I'll have my earbuds in, I'll listen to podcasts on leadership. And I never told anyone what I did. And at the time, I just left a role as a CNO and senior VP. And they are looking at this young person, because they're mostly older people in that space. And they're looking at me like I'm this lost soul. They was like, so tell me about you. What do you do when you're not volunteering? Do you have a job? And I was like, no. I said, well, what do you do? What are you good at? Like, what did you learn? I said, well, healthcare. And then it's like, well, there's a place down the street that they had some signs like, you want to look for a job there? Like, they look for like, and I'm like, yeah, I'll check it out. But I felt content just not telling them about me and being small and not just small in terms of the greater purpose, not small in terms of role, by the way.
No.
And this servitude where if even if I'm not serving, I'm going to make this place clean, and I'm going to make sure that it's safe for people to eat, and it's visually appealing. And there was joy that I had in being in that space for that period of time that I will never forget. There was a peace that I hadn't seen in years, that I felt and saw, and it just, I don't know. It was one of those moments in my life where it's, how some people will go to these like retreats where they like disconnect from technology and all that.
Oh, yeah.
And how they claim that they feel like, I think I felt that during that time because I just felt so joyfully disconnected. And just absorbing myself in serving others, that was joy to me.
That's great.
So at this time in my life, it's followership. It's learning the new things, the things that I thought that I knew and seeing them differently. And really pouring into other people.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. That's so beautiful.
Thanks for asking that. That was really great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And what a great interview. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all what you've been learning and just all the wisdom that you're gaining and your insights. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this. And thank you for this platform. You guys are amazing.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And for our listeners, that's a wrap for another Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and stay healthy.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast, now a top-rated podcast for healthcare leaders. Please share this podcast with other healthcare leaders and anyone else you think would benefit. We are certain that if you found value in it, they will too. If you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes. And also, it would mean the world to us if you took a quick moment to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast player. It helps to get the word out about our podcast and incredible guests. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to watch our podcasts. You can also follow us on our Missing Logic social media channels, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Until next time.